Continue now Chazorah, so in Ois Hey. So he's explaining now at length how it's shaykh. What does it mean that Kedem HaTzimtzum there is his chalkus on some degree, namely the whole notion of Chagas. So first of all, he established from the h'tschk from the Medrash that both of them use the moshel of the neshama, feeling the neshama in the guf, as a moshel for the Ein Sof, feeling the makim machala lifnei hatzimtzum. In the h'tschk we find teva toiv lahetiv. That's the source of the tzimtzum. So clearly indicative that lifnei hatzimtzum, this teva hatoiv, which means chesed, which means gevura, which means teferes. And likewise the medrash, maha neshama malas haguf, kacha kadosh baruch hu mamala es ha'olam. He says the olam is the makim machala. And we're drawing the analogy of the neshama. So again, we see, although here the point is the chayis, and in the h'tschk the point is to zero in on teva tev lahetiv, but in general it's the same inyan that indeed lifnei hatzimtzum there is the inyan of chesed and gevura and tiferes for that matter. So he didn't really answer how was it possible, but began the explanation by these primary sources, but then goes on to say that the moshel is not doimit to the nimshel, so it's a limited moshel. And what he goes on to say, the end of Isay is that even though the neshama before comes into the guf and therefore is invested in the various limbs of the body, the eye to see, the ear to hear, and so on, it's poshut, meaning to say it's divested of any such structure, and certainly what I just described now is much lower already than the eser koiches, the faculty of sight, the faculty of hearing. Yeah, so that's for sure, but it's even divested of eser koiches. However, nonetheless, it's not fundamentally removed from the whole notion of a body and animating a body. And that's because it is an animating force. And if it's an animating force, is in the words of the Maamar, teval yesh gama teval laheitiv ulahachis es haguf. It has already intrinsic to the neshama before it's invested in the body, this nature to give life to a body. And how will that manifest? It's going to happen through 10 koiches. Now this is tzorich bir. This requires explanation. So why is it going to be only 10 koiches? Not only because, well, there's no other way to animate the body. The body needs 10 faculties of intellect and seichel. But clearly it means that notwithstanding its overt property of simplicity of pshitus, but when it manifests, first of all, it's an animating force, and when it does, it's going to be through eser koiches. So that means that those 10 faculties are there in a very latent way. And a bigger raya is, he says, the union of gilgulim, that it's a punishment. It's tsar, it's great pain for the neshama to be incarnated, trapped in a doimim, in an inanimate object, or a tzimeach or a chai, which happens in order for the neshama to affect a certain tikkunim. So the neshama comes down and it doesn't become the animal or the plant or the stone, but it's trapped in, and that's part of the humbling of the neshama, the tikkun of the neshama. There's two factors here. It's a tsar for the neshama, and it's only releases when that object is employed in a mitzvah, generally. Many stories of the Baal Shem Tov that illustrate these fundamental ideas. This is all part of the Avodas HaBirurim. At any rate, why is it a tsar? If the neshama be'etzem, before it's invested in the guf, is completely divested from the guf and there's no shaykhs to the guf, and it's an atmizdike chayis. I don't mean chayis as in chayis that animates, but in essential life, what difference does it make where it is? Be in a guf and be in a human body, or be an inanimate object, or be in an animal, it wouldn't affect it. as we said, we counted once, we're talking about Atzmi and a Pnimi and a Chitzoni, a Chitzen. So the Atzmi, only a Rebbe is truly an Atzmi, but it not affected at all by the environment and completely affected, transforms the environment. Etzem, the atom makes no difference to the atom, to use an analogy in science, what configuration it is, completely unaffected to the actual atom, a gas, solid, liquid, whatever the molecular structure. But so the fact that it's tsar means the fact that the neshama is in pain, in anguish, tsar, to be in, not in a guf, means that it is intrinsically connected to a guf. So therefore, even with conclusion that even though it's pashut, but still its teva is to animate, and its teva is to animate through these eser koiches only, which means therefore that the eser koiches and the nature of animation is integral to its very core identity, which why to be in a place that it cannot animate and express itself is painful. Not so the Ein Sof. In the words of the Maimer here, that is not integral. The nature to animate, the nature to create, and to express dafke and eses svidus, that's intrinsic to the Ein itself. That's not Ein itself, because the Ein itself can express svidus, endless svidus, and moreover, not only could the Ein itself able to express himself in any endless ways, endless. Moreover, and this is the essential point, it doesn't have to manifest at all. So why is the Eitz and why is the Medrash bringing a mashal of the neshama to have a tev lehetiv? Ma neshama malas aguf. So let's look at it. Look at the ICC in the bottom of the beginning of Vav. Just 1 second. What does he say? The Indian is that the analogy to the neshama is only to the mashal is only in this that in the Ein Sof lifnei tzimtzum there is teva tev lehetiv. Like there is the potential for everything. That's all we're saying. And not the same way as the neshama, the same neshama, yes, in the sense that the neshama has teva tev lehetiv. But the neshama is, well, teva tev lehetiv is intrinsic to its core identity. Not true of the Ein Sof. So it's not the way that it is in the neshama, but it's only because of its absolute shleimus of Alikus, there is that also. Okay, that's the gist of it. As he says, the post-tzimtzum, so what happens is there's manifested these particular eser sviras, and they're invested in the oil and produce oil, etc. That's because that exists before, but it exists before lifnei tzimtzum, not intrinsically, but only because of his choice, in simple language, because of his shleimus. So everything is there. But then there is the choice, ultimately, what to manifest. And he manifests eser koiches dafke. In the words of the Maimer, there, the teva tov is Ein Sof and pshitus legamri. And in 2 words, Koil Yochel. In the middle of the ice, it's sad, it's being. Koil Yochel, it's present. We're clear? Okay, there's more arichas, but that's the gist of it. So now, getting to the tefillah, we want to explain what it means So now he explained that what does it mean that there's chagas lifnei tzimtzum, and this is all to lead to what is the final statement in the tefillah h't'chk after identifying all of the levels of chagas lifnei tzimtzum all the way down to biyah to nehi, then the menucha shleima shata reitzah. So that's why Ata Echad Shimcha Echad Ata Chesed Shimcha Gvura. Here's an important point now coming. And the third thing, Umika Amcha Kisol Goy Echad Ba'aretz, that's Tiferes. That Yidden Ba'aretz, as you said before, Tiferes, because of the pasuk, Yisol Hashem B'cha Espoer, and Espoer, it's a diuk here, with the aleph in front of it, the word Tiferes, right? Tifer, it's aleph, and then kind of the word Tiferes is there. Meaning to say, the aleph is Pele, wonder. The wonder is that Yidden are able to draw. This is the wonder ba'aretz, the aleph, the pele, that Yidden draw down in the aretz this level of Ata Echad, of the shleimus and pshitas of Ein Sof, as it's expressed through chagas. But where is that expressed? Ba'aretz. And how is Yidden do that? How are Yidden able? How is it possible that a neshama be'emes? Classically, the neshama emerges where Chochma Datzilus, as he explains in Tanya. But that's because the shayrish of the neshama, that's the neshama that emerges as an identity as a neshama. But the shayrish of the neshama is all of b'machshav, the highest levels, rooted in the pshitas of Ein Sof, and therefore Yidna Mamshich Ba'aretz, the Ein Sof Lifnei Atzimtzum. Everybody has the diak of Espo'er, Aleph Tiferes, Yidna Tiferes, and moreover, first of all, Tiferes itself is rooted in always in a level that transcends both Chesed and Gvura. That's Bechlal. It's all the question of degree. But the Aleph brings out the Pele. The Pele is that Yidna are able to mamshich the pshitas of Ein Sof, where into Elam Hazah Gashmi Ba'aretz, and that's the true wonder. It's one thing to have a scholarless of in Lifnei Tzimtzum or even Matzilus Tiferes. It's true that it also draws into a more transcendent level, but to such a degree, obviously, it requires more explanation. But we can appreciate this to have that revealed. Lamata Ba'aretz, that's the true Pele. Now, Zion. Wasn't a good of Isaiah, and let's run through it. However, so the Gimel Kavim post Simtzum, so the way the Gimel Kavim are revealed in Kesed and in Ak, right? That's the next statement in the Ata Echad. So there we have already Ischalkus, division. And they're completely incomparable to the Gimel Kav Lifnei Tzimtzum. What was the Nekudavi before? What was the Shaila? What's the answer? Nobody can help me here. He said, here, he uses the word Nasata. In the second, what the Lashon of the Tefillah. Tiferes Gedula, Teres Yeshua, Yoiminu Uchakdusha L'Amcha Nasata. What was the diak before about Nasata? The same thing, just changing, as it were, address, ownership, like something that is given from hand to hand, from one domain to the other. And now we just said, and the point that he says over here is the statement of Kabbalah. There's a more than the difference between Biyah and Atzilus, Nivroim and Netzolim, is the difference between Kesed and Ak. Ak is the highest level of Kesed, to what? Whoa. So here's so the Chagas as it comes now, and it's manifested post Tzimtzum in Ak and in Kesed, and certainly Atzilus and lower. It's incomparable to the way Chagas exists in the Pshitas of Eretz of Lifnei Tzimtzum. So how did we say before that it's Nasata? It's only Gilui Helim. So he gave two examples, and we gave an example. Havdil Kavayoch. It's really based on these examples. What are the two examples? What's the glass house? The crystal house. What's the point of the glass house? You're in the house. When you're in the house, you're looking through the glass pane. So you see everything that's outside the house. You see it all, but the actual, that what you're looking at is outside the house. You don't have it because of the walls that make the division. So it seems what's in the Nimshal, what parallels to what? Outside, being inside, he had the Moshel being inside the house. So inside the house is Ak and Kesed. And looking outside, so you see, but you're outside, you're out and they're in, even though you're seeing it. What was the other Moshel he gave? And then we gave a third Moshel, kind of it makes it all come together. What's the second Moshel? Bottom of the page. Moshel born in Chassidus. Explains the word Atik. Another meaning of the word Atik. Usually Atik is a copy. A maitik is a copyist. The one who writes down the Maimon is called the maitik. Ha'tokeh. Usually, not usually, in general, Atik is explained as meaning two things: ancient and removed, and it brings out the mile of Atik. Atik is removed and ancient, days of yore, the Gabe what? Atzilus and beyond. Here, he's bringing out the chsoron, but the limitation of Atik. It's only a copy. Now it's a faithful copy, but it's a copy of what? Of what's happening Lifnei Tzimtzum. So very simple. How's that Nasata? It's not the same. How's that Nasata to give? It's not the same thing. It is a big difference. Like the same thing. It's in an example of the copyist, it's the same thing. So here's the Moshe we gave that makes it clearer. A person witnessed something and he describes it. A second person heard it and says exactly the same words. So to the listener, what's the difference? He said it, he said it. The difference is he was there and the other guy wasn't. He's repeating what the other guy said. So it's a faithful, in other words, what is it? Let's talk about Megillah. What are we talking about here? In Atik and in Adir, the truth of the shleimus, everything we're saying of the shleimus of the Eibishter, that the Chagas don't define him, it's his choice. And that truth is said there, but it's said as an outsider saying it. It's an outsider saying this truth. There's some subtle level of something else talking about God. Whereas it's be'emes, it's this lofty level of holiness. But if that's him, so not talking about the Eibush. This is the Eibush expressing himself. So to the listeners, the same language. It's ha'tchek, it's nasata, it's gilui helim. But he says it's be'en aroich. The be'en aroich is, you're talking about something, or you were there. This, by the way, is possibly one of the, I mentioned the other day that Rabbi Glick was telling me at Diuk in Tanya, Perek Gimel in Tanya. The end of Tanya there, he says that without das, then any emotion that one engenders through his boneness in the likus, and he thinks he's experiencing an emotional response. It calls it dimyoin shav, false illusions. So he asked, and I saw that there was people that speak about it. I heard it actually. Why did they say false illusions? Dimyonis. It's imaginatory, false imagination. From which we see, no, that there is a virtuous imagination. The problem is when it's a false imagination, but there's a virtuous one. And l'chora, that's kind of what we're talking about over here, meaning to say. Let's first explain what das means. Why, if there's no das, he has the chachma, bina. We know bina, friends, is a very developed understanding. You can write a whole sefer. You can write a whole sefer about the subject, whatever you're talking about. Chassidus included. But what's das? Das in one word means that this is my God. Das means the personal connection. My God. So if that's missing, so the whole any emotional response is a lie. You're excited about the idea, not about Hashem. It's the idea that excites you. That's a lie. It's ava and yira, you love, and you're in awe, but you love awe. You love the idea, the beautiful idea that Chassidus explains. That's shov. That's a lie. Because it's missing das. Again, what das means, what the yodes chava das means, it's connected to me. This is God talking to me. That nekudah, and that requires. It's really good of emes. Das is connected to emes. Who are we talking about? So that's missing its shov. But then there's the myonis which are not shov, which means that using the imagination and trying to understand, and it's still a dimion. And that's exactly what kesed is. I mean, kesed is an act. It's not lies, and they're not capable. We're not God. You know, they're not elikus itself. But they're the complete bittul where they're talking about and expressing the shleimus of Ein Sof. So it's a dimion in the sense that you're not there on the outside. You're looking through you're looking through there's a glass, there's a tzimtzum here. But it's not false chas v'shalom. It's not a lie. Yeah, it's kind of clear. This is a subject for Fabrengen, really, but there's, not as there room for, it's critical. The power of the imagination, the power to be able to entertain, even though it's not his world, not my world. At least there's the das, it's not my world in the experience of it, but it is my world, it's my God. If that nukut of das is there, then imagining what it's like to be or what it will be is a very healthy and good thing. Fikir speaks a lot about that kind of thing of, the power of memory. And okay, so memory, you were there, so it's different. You were there, you're just recalling, and to some ways, in some sense, you can go back to that place, the power of memory. But it is connected to Dimyan. You're imagining it now. It's not happening now. What was it like to be by Fabrengen? What was it? It's a healthy thing to try and to imagine that. Picture oneself there. And for that matter, imagine the Geula. What did Rebbe write in the famous letter? I don't know if this is the same or not, but perhaps the famous, you're talking about the famous letter to the first president of the state of Israel, Mr. Yitzhak Ben Tzvi. Rebbe apologizes that he does not call him in Hebrew Nasi. He doesn't use the title Nasi. He apologizes and he says, because since the time he went to Ched, and even before that, it's a 2-year-old child, began to form in his mind. He says, I think the word, I don't know if he used the word dimmin there, but larake, what it's going to be like when Mashiach comes, and how it's going to be such a time when we will actually thank Hashem, for all of the suffering. Now, it was not that the suffering will be over. That's not the Mashiach we're waiting for. That's a lie. But that the suffering is transformed, and he's called Nasi. I can't bring myself to use this term for anything else. It's also, he began to form and imagine in his mind. It's a very ultimately healthy imagination. Mind you, just derech hagav, but he calls the Rebbe Nisi Dereinu. because that's not something else. That's it. Okay. Let's go further. Yeah, so this was a Zion. He bought in Nigla. In what was the thing? What was the analogy in Nigla that he brought of Noisim Rishus L'Rishus? He brought an example of Milamata L'Mayla, when something is, here we're talking about Amshach L'Mayla Mata, from that symptom to post symptom. He gave a moshel from an Aliyah Rishus L'Rishus. What was that? We just had it recently. Anybody? Page Nun Ches. Vayokom stay Ephraim, and the field of Ephraim had an aliyah that it went from the Rishus of Ephraim to whom? To Avram. Miyad Hedyet liyad Melech, the same field, but now it's a completely different domain. Now belongs to Avram. That's the way. That's an example of an aliyah malamata l'mayla. What's the conclusion of all of this? So that's the conclusion of the first two stages of Chagas Lifnei Tzimtzum and Chagas post Tzimtzum at the highest levels of Kesed and Ak, and how much more so as we now get into Ishtalshalus Atzilus and then Nehi of Atzilus. Chagas of Atzilus is bound up with Moichin, or rather the other way around. The Moichin is bound up with the Midas, so there we get already very hardcore, relatively speaking, Yischalkus, Avram Yogel, Yitzchak Yeranim. And the He, that's the next part of the Tefillah, Menuchas Av and the Dova. So there we don't find the Lashon the Sinna. This is not simply Gilei Helen Bilvad, but here we have Kalim already. And what does Kalim mean? Kalim mean, it's like Bitl Ayesh and Bitl B'Metzias. In both cases, there's an other. There's an other. Kes and Arich is Bitl B'Metzias. And the Bitl already of lower is already relatively to the Bitl of Atzilus is Bitl Ayesh. What's between Bitl B'Metzias and Bitl Ayesh? Bitl B'Metzias is the starting point. There is a receiver here. It's not a likus. But the starting point of consciousness is you, and therefore me. And the starting point of consciousness in Bitl Ayesh is there's me, and I acknowledge you. So once we get to Atzilus, and certainly lower, there it's already Medida Mitzada Kalim. What does that mean? The starting point is I'm here. I acknowledge I come from you. So that's already a Yischalkus, which is far greater, out of a different order altogether. So the Kesem, which is really as Chassidus says, in the mutzah between Ein Sof and Oilamus. So what did we just say now? It has these two contrasting properties. Beginning, we said you're on the outside. It's not Ein Sof. This is through the glass wall. This is the copyist speaking. Nonetheless, it's still Bittul B'Metzias, because the whole starting point is you. That's who's saying you. Something other is saying you, but it's still you. That's Bittul B'Metzias. Whereas Atzilus is Bittul, relatively speaking. Usually we use it. That's the same model for Atzilus the Gabe Biyah. Everything is relative. But Atzilus the Gabe Kesed is Mitzad Kelim. Again, its starting point itself. Ani Moide or Moide Ani. He starts Bemis with a bit of the Metzias, because that's why you got to say it before you're still a bit groggy. You don't say Moide Ani after the person's already started misburning, you're ruining it. You're ruining it. That's already Ani Moide. You got to say it when the Seichel, everything is still a little bit not. And what comes out there, the Yechidish V'Nefesh, and the Yechidish V'Nefesh is not Ani Moide, it's Moide Ani. Still the Yid is saying it, but that's Bittul Metzias. So that's Kesed and Ak. First word is admit, and then ani. Follow the difference. But the first word is you. And the ani is this because, as we learned, the beautiful sikh of the Rebbe and the sikh, the whole country, in Yashateres Achsidus, that the ani, for a host number of reasons, expresses the Yechidah Sheben Neshama. And let us begin with Moide. Just Derech Hagav, we see the previous generations, the main Adgosha was Krishma Shalamita. Our generation, it's more, the Rebbe is more Moedan in the morning. It was yesterday, it's a new day. The cheshbonos and the beating, the tshuva, it's not discounting it, God forbid. And it's brought in Chassidus. We had it recently in a Maimer, David Krishma Shalamita. But the Deir HaShvi, after all of, in other words, historically, all the previous generations brought us to the end of Golus, the end of the night, Krishma Shalamita. And now the Rashvi is the dawn of Geula. Now the Avodah is the Meidani and Avodah B'Peil, and just get on with the job. Up, out of bed, and do what has to be done. Asiyah La'ila. Our generation is the Meidani generation. It's a story, All right. I thought that we would finish, but we will. Now the mice like this. Tomorrow I'm traveling. I'm going to Las Vegas tomorrow for Yitz's Kislev. And the flight's 7 o'clock. There's no way I can give the shit. And then in Bachlal, I would expect that tonight will be a Fabrengen after the formal program. So anyway, some stomach that's would work, right? Even if you didn't register, I hope you all registered for the program. If not, to come later. My question to you is the next day. The next day, I'm actually, okay, it's just going to be 3 o'clock in Las Vegas. That's it. So, could do it. The question is, if guys will be here the second night. Are you still going to go somewhere else to Fabrengen? Yes, the answer is yes. Okay. So then Wednesday morning we'll have the shir. It'll be by Zoom. Okay. Praise Hashem.